Hi there. Welcome back to part two of tonight's Cambridge Inside Out. Yeah, and I'm still Robert Winters.
And I'm still Terry Smith.
Right? And Susana is still on vacation. But hopefully, actually, I should probably mention we may be on the air next week, though, I think I might also want to take a vacation. So I think, anyway, on the Cambridge Civic Journal, we'll have a little note to say whether we're actually planning to do a show next week or not. So anyway, just you can tune in and check into that. So anyway, before the break, we were sort of mentally moving up toward up and around the Alewife Tea Station. And actually, let me just sort of mention quickly, I had a rather enjoyable time this past Tuesday evening. The Cambridge Planning Board, which is actually has a number of matters that are relating to Alewife on their plate, including one tonight, possibly a decision on one of the new proposed housing developments. They were having a walkthrough of the whole area up around what we call the Alewife Triangle. Again, I won't sort of project maps here exactly, but where the railroad tracks runs east, more or less east-west, just north of the tracks up where the Alewife Tea Station is, sort of a triangular shape of land, and that's called the Alewife Triangle. And on the south side, connecting down to Concord Avenue, they refer to that as the Alewife Quadrangle. And it's sort of one of the, other than North Point, these are the last of the sort of the up and coming developable pieces of Cambridge. Possibilities for future tax base, but also, creating new neighborhoods. Quite honestly. So there was a walkthrough up there with the planning board, and I hadn't been walking through there in years. And I was up with the new reconstructed wetlands, which if anybody hasn't gone up by the Little River, go. It's great. Up along Cambridge Park Drive. And we actually took everybody up there. It was really kind of nice. But I didn't realize until we actually went behind what's known as the Oak Tree development, which was built, about 10 years ago?
Yeah.
That there's just vast amounts of surface parking. You can look at it on a satellite image or in a map. When you actually get your feet on the ground out there, it's just vast. Sue Clippinger, who's the Director of Traffic and Parking and Transportation for this city, she refers to it as Kansas, because it's just like fields of cars, just going as far as the eye can see. But that's where they're proposing to put some housing, so it's interesting.
Yeah, and the city went through several-year planning process.
This is for Concord Alewife?
On both sides.
Yeah.
In the late, there's further back, there's the Fish Book.
Oh yeah, actually I'm gonna just do this
Okay.
rapid. The Alewife revitalization, this dates probably to the 70s or 80s, right?
Yeah,
I forget
like
exactly. It was the first big one I know of, and then it was culminating in a council vote in, I think, 2005 was the Concord Alewife plan, which laid out the zoning, which for the most part, I believe, or maybe completely, exactly what the zoning is today, which is what has encouraged the very housing which is now coming online, or being proposed.
The housing that's been proposed does come out of that. I was involved through the chamber. The chamber has a number of members who are up there, and I was involved in some of the discussions. One of the goals of that plan was not only to build on either side of the tracks, but to build some connectivity,
Right.
and also to improve the connectivity on the other side of the Parkway.
Right.
With that side.
They actually want to put in a road grid eventually in the quadrangle, so
Yeah.
it'll be more like a real place.
Right. They're very large industrial blocks. It's an interesting place to go up to. If you need wood to do trim,
Right.
You can go up there. If you need, when we redid our house, we got the wood flooring to match the wood floors we had in our house up there. There's a bakery. There's the ART. Iggy's ART stores their props up there.
Right.
There's a company that makes the cabinets where you have a hearing test.
Right.
Is based up there. It's fascinating stuff up there, but it really doesn't work except as a place to go to and get out of.
Right.
And that's
And,
what the
and getting
plan
in
was.
and out of there is
And
not so
getting
easy.
in and out of there is so easy.
Right.
So there's a fair amount of housing. There's some housing has been built on the quadrangle side.
Facing
and
Concord Avenue
Facing
primarily?
Concord Avenue and further back.
Right.
The old Genuity building was torn down and there's housing being built there. And then the project that's at the planning board tonight is the third housing project on that side of the railroad tracks.
Right.
But what hasn't happened is finding a way to pull those things together. Fresh Pond Mall remains as a 1950s, 60s suburban shopping mall.
Right, and though the city has certainly made suggestions that it would love to see, sort of in a coaxing kind of way,
Right.
some changes to the property to allow a little more pass-through of pedestrians and whatnot. But it doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon.
No, and it's, the redevelopment of the strip mall on the other side where Circle Furniture, Trader Joe's, CVS is now.
We used to call it, was the ground round was there?
The ground round was.
Yeah, we used to,
there at
the
park.
terminology, we have to change our terminology. Those of us who've been around a while still refer to the two rotaries. One is the Sozio
Right.
rotary and the
Sozio's
ground
still-
round
Yeah,
rotary.
Sozio's still there.
Sozio's still there.
But yeah, and the developer did bring, there's a bank, there's a sushi place, there's a couple of storefronts that now front on the parkway. The thinking in the planning process is that getting more commercial at the sidewalk edge rather than behind the parking would make the area more dynamic, less of a pass-through, a place you drive away from.
But you can't make it, I mean, in a way, some of that is also forced by the fact that there's this gigantic piece of the inner belt, not the inner belt, but the highway network called
Right.
Route 2, which comes in as a mammoth highway and then immediately just turns into capillaries.
Yes.
It's like a blood pressure problem up there.
Right.
And I've heard, actually, when we did this walkthrough up at Alewife the other day, I heard, just verified, which I'd heard before, the notion that, when people are complaining about traffic, is that approximately 80% of the traffic there at any of the problematic times is all pass-through traffic. And with a little bit of economic recovery, more people living in Lexington coming back to work in Boston, so there's more cars coming in through there. And I don't see any way which, other than bulldozing Cambridge and putting a superhighway through it, which nobody wants.
Right.
I don't see any way to make, other than just changing patterns of people's desire to drive. I don't see it going away.
Well, it's interesting that that pass-through traffic has persisted as development has increased in Cambridge. And part of that is that half the people who commute to Cambridge commute in ways other than driving by themselves,
Right.
which is rare in Greater Boston, rare in the United States. So as long as people keep taking buses, taking the T, biking, carpooling, vanpooling to come in and out of Cambridge, there's an opportunity for the pass-through traffic to take up the space. What happens when people I've always said that I'd rather have somebody drive into Cambridge and stop than
Right.
go through. So if we're
Yeah.
gonna have the traffic anyway, I'm okay with it coming in and stopping here. But that 80%, I remember when the Oak Tree development was being discussed, the traffic studies showed that. When there was some other development being discussed in that area, the same issues came up.
Actually, even back in what's now the kind of the ancient fish book, there's very direct references to the sort of the difficult traffic that sort of passes through the area. So this is nothing new. This is something that's been
Right.
around for 40, 50 years.
And the original proposal in the Red Line, going way back, to run to Lexington was supposed to.
Well, eventually, actually, it was not only to Lexington, but, well, actually, I guess it is
No,
Lexington.
through Arlington to Lexington.
To Arlington, to Lexington. So when you're out to Route 128,
Yeah.
basically.
Was supposed to relieve some of that traffic.
But it
when
never
the decision was made, because of financial reasons and because of opposition in Arlington, you know, the traffic continued to come.
Right.
And, you know, one of the options that has been discussed over the years is being able to cross the tracks within that area. The city's interest is in providing bike and pedestrian access on either side. They're less excited about the idea of putting a roadway through. There've been discussions of putting a commuter rail stop there, which is the commuter rail that now runs through Cambridge,
Through Porter Square.
through Porter Square. Having a stop there and then the stop in Belmont would create some issues. But if the MBTA does go to the single, I forget what they call them, but they're the railroad train, they're single car vehicles that it's not an engine and then passengers. It's the engine, passenger are all in
Right.
one single piece, which they're looking to, which I think they're going to do in Boston. You know, maybe that opens up as an opportunity that you could run some trains like that.
You know, I've always been, you know, again, I grew up in New York City, and we had, you know, the Long Island Railroad.
Right.
But the thing is that there was a very much more extensive, you know, public transit system than we have around here. And I'm still kind of disbelieving of how much commuter rail, whether it's actual commuter rail tracks or just abandoned tracks, are actually around that could be used, and you could actually grow a much better public transit system around here.
Well,
than
and
we actually
that's,
have.
you know, an MBTA, the MBTA having the resources to do it, plus communities agreeing to, I mean, we kind of get back to, we talk a lot about the zoning issue in Cambridge, but there are 351 cities and towns that have their own zoning ordinances. And they often work contradictory to regional goals.
Yeah.
You walk around Cambridge, you'll very quickly see a bumper sticker that says no farms, no food. But the reason that farmland out in Devons and places like that, or you know, around Marlborough, those parts of the state, are being taken for housing developments is because that's where you can build.
Right.
If you can't build the density in Cambridge or Somerville or Boston or Waltham or Arlington or Belmont or places that are already developed, the development's going to go to those
Right.
places. And
Well, you know, there will always be people
maybe
who...
it should be no density, no farms.
Right. Well, there will always be people who will want to, you know, once they have their second child, want to move way out to the burbs in a single-family home. But there's been a national trend, in at least this past 5-10 years or so, people moving back to the city all over the country. You know, the suburban malls are sort of collapsing. You know, so there is a lot of demand to actually do the housing. So I think there's a little more willingness to have some additional density. And like in the Cambridge context, it's a matter of how much are people willing to, I mean, there's some groups that are just don't want anything here, which I think is ridiculous. But, you know, there's appropriate places to do it. Personally, I believe that a certain amount of density at Alewife is a good thing. You know, but, you know, that's actually, I think, with the Carlone petition, I think some people have been very upfront in saying that there are really just 3 projects that are currently sort of before us that they just want to stop, and that's really what it's about. One of which is the Sullivan Courthouse, which is a whole nother matter. Another one, and then projects up and around New Street and the Alewife area, which are primarily housing proposals out there that they want to kind of monkey wrench bit.
Yeah.
So.
And there will be other projects coming down the line that will require special permits that have, you know, that the zoning to create the opportunity for the special permit were long,
Right.
drawn-out battles.
Well, this is also a pretty prime period where there's money around, with people wanting to do investments. So it's, in my view, it's kind of the wrong time to be reconsidering all these things. So I think we should at least let this cycle kind of work itself through first.
Right, well, and that's one of the and I wanted to talk a little bit about energy. I was on the Climate Protection Action Committee for about 10 years. And one of the goals when that was created was to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from Cambridge by 15% from 1990 by, I think it was 2003 or 2004. And the city didn't do it, although residential saw significant reductions in natural gas use, while more residential properties were using natural gas, which was just interesting. But the idea of cutting by 15% by any means often became the discussion. And if we'd torn down 15% of the highest using buildings and highest energy using buildings in the city, we wouldn't have solved climate change. We'd have probably made it worse, because those buildings and the people who lived in them or worked in them would go someplace else.
Right.
So when we think about these in the larger context, how do we make what we have better, and how do we accept that maybe Cambridge has more people living here, more people working here, more energy use to save someplace else?
Right.
And it's difficult to do in the Massachusetts context, because we have 351 cities and towns that each run somewhat autonomously. County government doesn't exist, regional things. But then you get to how we can make things, how we can encourage the investment that's needed. And this is a long way to getting to, we talk a lot about buildings, but what it really is money. It's people taking money and investing someplace. And if they choose not to invest in Cambridge, they'll invest it someplace else.
Right.
And if we make it too difficult to invest here, then it's not the buildings won't get built, they'll get built someplace else.
Right. Well, I think one trend that's been happening, which has, for every good thing, there's sort of some downsides, to be sure, but, with a lot of the biotech growth in Kendall Square and whatever, there were a lot of people, just because there was some housing availability, but I think some of it was encouraged. There are a lot more people now, I think, I haven't looked at the stats lately, but who are choosing to live in the city and work in the city.
Right.
So dramatically cutting down commuters. They're also reinvesting in their homes, making them more energy efficient. So there are some sort of small solutions that are happening, and the city has certainly been encouraging. Of course, the downside of that too is that, many of the best housing opportunities were, for those who want to have a nice one-family home, just a single, have been in areas which previously people thought of as off limits. Oh, not a very good neighborhood. So now they're buying into those neighborhoods. The housing costs are going up. The rents have gone up with that as well. And it's making it a little tougher for some of the longtime residents of Cambridge to continue to live here.
Absolutely.
So
but part of that is, there are two empty, there's 1 2-family, and there's former funeral home that have sat empty in my neighborhood, for the funeral home for about 6 years, the house for longer, that the owners in both cases have attempted to make housing projects that would work.
Right.
This isn't 100 units, this is 4 2-family, maybe make it a 3 or 4 family in the funeral home. And the zoning has blocked that, has stymied that. The city, working with MIT a few years ago, came up with the solar map. You can find it through the city's website.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When I was on the CPAC, I made a suggestion. Let's take the 25 the best opportunities for solar electric in the city, send a letter to the property owners and say, if you put PV on those roofs, we will handle every regulatory issue that's necessary in order for you to put PV on your roof.
Right.
And my other suggestion was waive all of the permitting fees.
Right.
And the attitude out of City Hall to that proposal was
Ain't gonna happen.
ain't gonna happen. But
Hey,
That's-
you'll have an opportunity again. We're going to be talking about the citywide plan this
Right.
coming year.
But
You know,
that's-
so
But, you know,
Come by.
getting investment in sustainability and energy efficiency in existing buildings requires making it easier for people to do stuff with their buildings. I ran a program for the Commonwealth when I moved out here in the late 80s for the State Energy Office. We did almost 30,000 loans for people to insulate their attics, replace their heating systems, replace their windows. And we were successful because we made it easy. When people were coming into a bank, we wrote the interest rates on the bank, to do one thing, it was in the banker's interest to encourage them to do the energy work.
right.
Because they could write a larger loan, and a zero interest loan for $12,000 of a $24,000 project at 13% interest is a 6.5% loan, which everybody's happy with. You know, if you go to do something in Cambridge, very often the first answer you get is no. It's very hard to encourage somebody to do other things that you would like them to do when the first thing they hear from you is no.
Right. You know, it's funny, I hate to keep coming back to this sort of citywide plan, but, you know, there's a little piece of me says, though I know that the people who promoted it and, you know, sort of, you know, pushed it through and insisted on having it, you know, I think it's fair to say their intention is they want to just stop growth. You know, they're going to be mad at me for saying that,
Right.
but honestly, if you know the individuals who are involved, you know, that's kind of really what they're about. But the thing is once a process like this actually starts, you open the door to it, and other creative minds enter
Yes.
into the process. It can actually go in a lot of different directions, you know, and so maybe sort of, I don't think anybody's going to really be encouraging too much, you know, eradicating of all regulations anytime soon.
Not eradicating, it's changing them to make them more user-friendly and transparent.
Oh, I absolutely agree. There's room for improvement in this. I actually find it incredible. You know, it's funny, you know, people talk about how, well, in Cambridge, they just let developers do everything or whatever, you know, but then when you actually talk to the people who are building, they say, my gosh, it's like navigating a minefield,
Yeah.
you know. They're pretty good at it after a while. They get to know what, I mean, I think sometimes the builders know the zoning code better than the city officials. So they know exactly how to meet the letter of the law. That's why, I mean, I think lately, I think in the context of the Carlone petition is making a big brouhaha to the fact that there were, was it 51 special permit process or design review special permit process applications. 2 were withdrawn and 49 to nothing. You know,
Right.
49 passed, none rejected. You know, I look at that and I go, yeah, because these people actually know what they're going to do.
Right.
They've read the codes and they've basically met all the conditions
And they've made changes
and
through the discussion process with the neighborhood group,
yeah.
with neighborhood groups, with other interested parties, with the planning board, with community development.
And the planning board imposes conditions on almost every one of these.
The notion that you haven't been listened to because you didn't get your way
Right.
needs, I mean, it's, you know, my 9-year-old nephews, when they get like that, I think they're a little too old for that at this point. But a lot of times that's what you hear. You didn't listen to me because you didn't do what I wanted.
Well, it gets even worse. I mean, I'll just say, I mean, I was going to write about this and I eventually will, but, you know, at the planning board meeting where they were taking up the Carlone petition and they rejected it unanimously, there was a very prominent member of the Cambridge Residents Alliance came right out, flat out, and said, you people are all, this is all pay to play, you guys are all on the take. And that turned the sentiment in the room around on a dime, because basically you have people here who are supposedly advocates for the public good, basically accusing planning board members of corruption. And then when called on this, they turned around and said, well, the city councils are too. I thought, well, thank you very much. This is really going to get us somewhere.
Yeah, well, and the planning, I mean, the planning board and the BZA members are some of the hardest working volunteers in this city.
They get a salary of $0 and 0 cents.
And
And they're good.
they're good. And And they ask good questions, and I've sat through enough of both. And they don't give people a carte blanche. They don't just say, "Oh, do whatever you want." It's a much more difficult process than that.
And they appreciate the public comments, and
Yes.
and they do incorporate it into their decisions.
Absolutely. But we sometimes, because of our zoning ordinance, run into these situations, more of a BZA issue than a planning board issue, where, and look at the BZA agendas over, a couple of months, the number of porches being converted to a bedroom, decks being extended a few feet. In my case, it was adding a bathroom on the second floor. Those projects are far exceed a restaurant being used as a different kind of restaurant, far exceed the sort of rampant development that people, and sometimes the hearings, if you ever want to spend a Thursday night, can get just absurd. There was I remember one, I forget what the particulars were, but one of the proposals to not need a variance was to put 8 inches of cement in the cellar, so the cellar would be under 7 feet, so it would no longer be considered livable space.
Yeah. You can definitely get a taste of the intricacies of city life when you go to some of those. We're actually down to our last 30 seconds here. Time flies, so So perhaps we'll have to come back one of these days. Actually, one last thing I'll say in the last 20 seconds is we were talking about Alewife area. One thing I learned for the first time is that if there is a bridge, if there is a new station possibly built, a passage over the railroad tracks might actually be incorporated into the station, which I thought was a very creative idea. So anyway, on that transportation note, this has been Cambridge Inside Out, and we'll see you sometime soon.
Thanks.